Brian Oliver presents Haunting Tales of Madness.
The Congregation, written by Brian Oliver, narrated by Kendra Miller. The Old West is full of tall tales. Legends and history often find themselves in an orgy of lost facts that are overwhelmed by imaginative fiction and religious embellishment. I tell you though, this story is as true as the sun is bright. If you don't believe me, that is your problem. On the plains of the panhandle of Texas, there was a small western town known as Dry Man's Gulch. It was named such as it was founded by a minister who preached primarily on the evils of the devil's drink and how drunkards were the seed of a great evil. The town name came more like a mockery by those who felt the minister was really just a spiteful old coot who never knew how to have fun. The minister, who was only known as Father Dry by most, was named Phineas O'Leary. He was of Irish descent, and though they called him Father Dry, his teachings were not Catholic in nature, nor any form of Christianity. In truth, most did not know that his true religion was other than that he stood against the owner of the town's cat house. Dry Man's Gulch had a small saloon that also served as an inn for women of ill repute. The madam of the establishment served as the true leader of the town. There was a sheriff and a mayor, but Madame Maldine had the true power. She was a firm believer that those who controlled the women controlled the men, and she was indeed correct. The majority of the men were found to be willfully compliant as long as they got to get their oats sown with a woman of guilty pleasures. The women she brought in were stunning and charming, always smelled sweet, and you could be sure that whatever your type, there was at least one, if not two or three women there who would meet your needs. Madame Maldine was busty and wore colorful dresses. She had long blonde hair that she kept clean and curled at all times. She used perfume from France that was known to sweep men off their feet. She was a hefty woman, and she knew it, was proud of it, and used it to her advantage more than once. Her pride and joy was her establishment and the women who worked it. The only man who was employed there was the bartender, who happened to be her kept man. Most of the young women who lived in town worked for Maldine, and most were obviously off the market for marriage. This caused a large rift with Maldine and the preacher man. O'Leary had moved in a small congregation of travelers, and with the hopes that they would stay in town and help him convert the unholy masses. They had planned a protest of sorts against the madam and her women of the evening. It was not even that they cared so much about the fornication, it was the drunkenness. The fact that the men and women would choose a hard drink over water and thus accept the damage it would cause. Such damages as mistreatment of their families and allowing a drop in their responsibilities, which could, in turn, affect others. The protest, however, quickly turned violent when one of their parishioners realized his eldest daughter had taken up to working with the madam. He had seen her with a man being lewd in the salon and could not abide by it. That man was the first to throw a punch as the two sides met. Men and women both engaged in violence. Punching, kicking, even biting one another and drawing blood. Every time the blood hit the ground, it soaked and dried into the dirt near instantly. The madam saw the preacher, and he eyed her back. The preacher was trying to calm both sides of the crowd, realizing that this was not the result he was seeking at all. The madam gave chase and cursed the man in an unknown tongue. The preacher attempted an escape, but once he realized he could not, Father Dry attempted to talk Maldine out of her rage. By the time the fighting was over, the saloon still stood prominent on the main road. The church tents were torn asunder. A few small fires had been lit in the chaos, and they were quickly knocked down with horse blankets and buckets of water. As the dust settled, the townspeople from both sides gasped as they saw Madame Maldine standing over the body of Father Dry. In her hand, she held a broken piece of wood from a post used to tie up horses. Blood dripped from the corners of the makeshift club. The preacher laid low beneath her heels, his head caved in and bleeding from the blow. His eyes looked eerily into the crowd. A hush came over the entire town. Men and women laid down their makeshift melee weapons, and Maldine caught her breath. "Is this what you wanted? Do you see what your god of peace has brought you? We never brought you any harm, did we? Did we?" She screamed and looked at the crowd. "You take your man, you bury him, and do not mark his grave. Choose you this day you will live in Dry Man's Gulch and follow my laws, or you will hide behind false piety of peace and wind up dead like this man." Dropping the club, Madame Maldine made her way inside the saloon. As she did, she seemed to have pain coming from her shoulders and quickly covered them with a shawl before slamming her office door. The town thrived for years. Those who lived there lived in peace and quiet. The only rowdiness really came at night, and it was the kind that was expected and encouraged. The town grew and even doubled in size in only 3 years. However, the town did not grow from welcoming outsiders. It grew from those who had once been members of the church, giving birth to healthy offspring and welcoming their families who had come from outside the territory. The town was a close-knit group. Strangers were not exactly welcome, but the occasional passerby was treated well during their stay as long as it was short. The madam was good to her girls, and if one did become pregnant from her work, she was encouraged to have the child and taken care of. She only had a few rules. Pleasures were to be found in her establishment, not elsewhere, and this included all meals, sex, and gaming. Married couples were even required to seek their physical joy by renting their rooms when they felt the desire. It was 4 years to the day of the minister's death that the lone cowboy rode into town. The cowboy and his horse strode into town from the east. The western sun was setting on them as they passed the stores and shops slowly. The clip-clop of the horse and the occasional snort filled the otherwise quiet street. He could hear in the distance the sound of a piano playing at the saloon. As he rode, the cowboy was sure that he saw a few people spying on him from behind closed curtains. His horse nearly stepped on a drunk that had passed out in the street, but the rider was quick to correct his course. The music got louder, as did the sound of a crowd singing. It almost sounded like a hymn, but something about the words were not right. As he reached the saloon, the cowboy dismounted and went to tie his horse to a post. The first post was missing the top half. Below there was a plaque that read, "The blood of the father dry shall never be washed away." This seemed odd to the cowboy, but he could do little more than a shrug and tie his horse to the next post. As he walked into the saloon, he heard clearly the end of an old hymn. "As his death may be a message to the horde, to the horde." The swinging doors of the saloon creaked, then batted back and forth behind the cowboy as he entered. Silence filled the room. Everyone turned to look at the cowboy. He saw the saloon chairs were all set up in rows facing the stage. On the stage was a podium, and at the podium stood Madame Maldine. She was dressed as a fancy female priest with her hair in wild curls. She looked sternly at the cowboy. "I'm sorry, mister, but you walked in at the wrong moment. This is a private memorial. They can help you across the street at the inn." The cowboy nodded and put his hands in a hasty fashion before backing out. As he started across the street, he saw a man come around from the back of the saloon and over to the back of the motel. The man was then quickly seen inside and turned the sign from closed to open. The cowboy smirked at the silliness of it all and stepped inside. He looked to the manager of the hotel. "I need a room, please." "Oh, yes, indeed. I am sorry for your unfortunate bout of embarrassment, Mr. O'Leary. Marcus O'Leary." "O'Leary, you say? I haven't heard a name like that since I got off the boat from Erin myself." "Well, that's my name." The manager pushed up his glasses and handed the register to Marcus to sign his name. He did so and placed a solid gold coin on top. "This cover my room for a few days?" "Oh, yes, sir, I think it will. But tell me, how long do you reckon you will spend in Dry Man's Gulch?" "Long as I need to, I reckon. You have yourself a good day now." He held out his hand and took the key to his room from the manager. It was room 13. He hated that and felt the number was unlucky, but it would have to do. Marcus O'Leary was in Dry Man's Gulch, and with him he brought his one true friend, known as Revenge. Marcus stayed in his room for a few hours. He got some clean water to wash his face and combed his red mustache and beard. He helped himself to a much-needed nap, and then, at about dusk, decided to put on some nicer duds. He opened his satchel and pulled out a nicely pressed red shirt and bolo tie. His pants, boots, and hat were all black. He walked out of the door and locked it before walking across the street and untying his horse. Marcus rode the beast around town, checking things out until he saw a sign that said, Maldine Stables. He smiled, and within the hour his horse was stabled, fed, and being brushed by a small girl whose eyes grew bright when he handed her her own shiny gold coin. The stable manager had also received his own gold coin and told Marcus he could keep his horse there as long as he wanted. Marcus gave a smile and tipped his hat. Walking the streets, the chime his spurs kept in rhythm with a tune he played in his head. Marcus walked up the stairs of the saloon and entered again. This time the saloon chairs were around tables. The stage was empty, the bar full. Many men were playing cards. A few were being taken upstairs by desirable women. Marcus walked up to the bar. The bartender looked at him and gave a smile that was nervous and unpleasant. "What you have, mister?" "Do you serve food in this establishment?" "Course we do. The best steaks this side of the Rockies." "Then I'll have a steak and fixins." "Anything to drink?" Marcus smiled at the bartender. "That is a great question. I think water'll do." The bartender looked disappointed, almost offended, and walked back to the kitchen with the order. Other men at the bar glanced at Marcus. He smiled at them and pulled 3 coins from his pocket, one for each man. "Shh," he said, and slid them each a coin. The men took them, looked them over. One man bit his, to be sure, and they pocketed the currency. Marcus smiled and tipped his hat. At the top of the saloon there was an elegant and refined office. It had red curtains on the windows, lovely sconces with candles that kept the room lit. There were books on the law, religion, cooking, home brewing booze, cattle, and all sorts of fiction. In the far corner of the room there was a desk made of red wood. It was quite solid and was home to all the business dealings of Madame Maldine. She sat looking over a self-made parchment accounting for different expenditures. She had an abacus that she used to do her math. The bartender came in looking worried. She stood up, looking bored with him from the onset. "What is it now, Neil?" "Sweetness, there is a man downstairs." "I should hope so. That is how we keep in business. We need lots of men downstairs. That is how we get them upstairs. The girls have to have men to work, you know." "That's not what I mean. I mean, he just put in his food order." "So cook him his food, Neil. You know, I do not have time for this bullshit." "Shut up and listen to me." He stood rugged and red with frustration. He had Maldine's attention. She always loved when Neil would man up and get aggressive. "Okay, I'm listening." "The cowboy who interrupted this service, he just ordered dinner. I asked him what to drink, and he said water." "Water? He didn't want whiskey or rum?" "No, my love, just water. He said water will do." "Well, I mean, we all need water from time to time. Don't get all riled up." "He is Irish, my love." "Okay, you are paranoid. That was 4 years ago, and the preacher didn't have a wife or kids. Who could know what happened? Don't be a racist, darling. It does not suit you." Maldine walked out of the office and looked over the railing down to the bar tops to see Marcus sitting and eating his steak. He then reached over and took a big drink of water. After doing so, he turned his head and looked up to where Maldine was watching. He smiled and gave a salute with his glass. Maldine gasped. For a brief moment, she did not see Marcus, but instead saw Phineas. She shut her eyes and went back to her office. She found her gun and flask. After taking a large swig, she started to stomp out of her office and down the stairs. As she came around the corner, she aimed her gun at the bar top. There was no one there. She turned. No one behind her. In fact, the saloon was empty. She quickly met up with, by a now heavily breathing, Neil. Where'd everybody go? Maldine walked over to the bar top and saw the empty plate, which had only a bit of steak juice on it. The knife and fork placed neatly on the plate. Check the girls. Neil went door to door, giving a knock of 3 times to each door before opening it. All but one girl was gone. The remaining girl, Catherine, was sitting on the bed wrapped in a blanket. She was a skinny young thing with brunette hair, a few freckles and fair skin. She wore a ruffled dress with a green corset and kept her hair in a braid down her back. She was putting on her shoes when Neil opened the door. Where is everyone? Catherine looked in his direction. I don't know, Mr. Maldine. A cowboy fella came in while I was in the middle of giving a man what he wanted. He tossed the man a coin and told him to leave. He offered me a coin too, but I have no need for copper. Copper? So you didn't take the coin? No, I took the coin, but then I just didn't get up and follow. She winked. May I see it? Of course. Catherine pulled the coin from between her cleavage and looked at it funny. It was much shinier, I swear. The coin was old, and appeared to be rusted. As Catherine attempted to hand it off, the coin disintegrated into dust. The madam walked outside, followed by Neil and Catherine. The streets seemed deserted. Neil and Maldine each held a 6-shooter. Catherine gulped behind them. As they walked, the madam stopped them near a motel room marked 13. She thought she could hear something. It was something vulgar. It was a sound that should only come from her establishment or a happy couple's marriage bed. Catherine turned a bit red. That sounds like Jolene. The madam nodded and stared at the door until the vigorous action inside the room died down. It took longer than Madame Maldine would have liked, but eventually the door opened. Jolene stepped out looking like a well-pleasured woman, her hair unkempt and her clothing only half on. She smiled at Maldine and then began to walk away as Marcus O'Leary walked out of the room, buttoning up his shirt. You hire talented women, madam, and your cook does make a nice steak. He smiled and put a cigarette in his mouth and then lit it with a match upon striking it across his own cheek. The madam pointed her gun at Marcus. Who the hell are you and what is your game here? She pulled back the hammer. Marcus took a long, slow drag from his cigarette and breathed out only a minor amount of smoke. Marcus grinned from ear to ear. He took 2 steps forward with his hands up, and a shot rang out. Madame Maldine held her wrist and yelped. Blood dripped from where her thumb used to be. The gun had fallen to the ground. As Neil attempted to defend his wife, another shot rang out. The bullet entered his right eye and exited out of the back of his head. As his skull exploded from behind his head, the blood splattered all over Catherine. She screamed and began to run. As she did, another shot rang out. The round ripped into her shoulder with enough force to rip off her right arm. Catherine fell to the ground and died, and almost instantly her face met the ground. Maldine stood there, looking to see where the 3 sharpshooters had staged themselves around the buildings. She knew them each by name, and this filled her heart with rage. She turned to look at Marcus and was struck in the face with his fist. Blackness filled her mind as she fell back. It would be several hours until she woke up. Maldine came to and found herself bound up with rope in a chair on the stage of the saloon. She struggled against the binding, but it was no use. Marcus walked up with a glass of water. He threw it on the madam, and she shook. Then she heard the laughter. It was the town, The entire town was sitting in the saloon looking up to the stage. The madam cried out, "Why are you doing this to me? Have I not given you everything your heart's desired, your passions, your lusts, food and drink? I looked after you as if you were my own." "Upon this rock I shall build my church," shouted Marcus. He held up a gold coin and grinned to the crowd. They all applauded him while giving shouts of "Amen" and "Preach it, Lord." Marcus looked to Maldine, and his grin grew wider than seemed natural. "These good people are my flock, Maldine, not yours. I know the way to any person's heart. It is not through drink or sex. Oh, no. It's all about shiny gold. Greed will beat lust every time." Maldine started to shriek in an unknown tongue, but before she could finish what she was saying, Marcus slapped her straight across the face. "Hush up now. The gift of gab is not going to help you out, not one bit. You Fae have had your time." He turned to the crowd, and with a wave of his hand, more gold coins seemed to fall from nowhere. "You see, this is my congregation now. My dear old uncle tried to do it the human way. That never works. You showed him that. And now it is your turn for a lesson. Gold always wins." Madame Maldine struggled and wriggled, but the bindings would not come loose. "What sorcery is this?" She tried again, and Marcus knelt down in front of her. "That isn't just your ordinary rope, lass. It is charmed, so one such as yourself cannot break it. You Fae are tricky, and I came prepared." "How did you know I was Fae?" "It wasn't hard. Did you think you were the only one? When you killed Father Dry, I would have thought perhaps you would know just how badly you messed up. We knew pretty quickly. A mere human would not have been able to kill him so easily. Now I am here to make things right." "What are you? A leprechaun?" She glared at Marcus as he stood and looked over her. "I can see why you might think so, but no. My real name is Creedney. Where do you think the little people get all their gold from in the first place? They needed a metal worker, after all." He walked around the podium and lit another smoke. Madame Maldine called out the congregation, but they were all entranced by the gold. "Help me! Help me, you fools! I gave you everything!" None looked up until Marcus spoke. "She gave you everything in exchange for your loyalty and worship. You may not have seen it, but that is exactly what it was. Your worship of her way of life. You who are so easily swayed by that which you desire. What wonders you humans are. You simply stared and allowed her to beat and kill a man who was only trying to help. True, he was a judgmental sort, but did he deserve the end he was met with? I think not. And for that, my good people, I must introduce you to my companion. I've given unto, and now she will take away. Ladies and gentlemen, cast your eyes upon fate. Caliche is here for you all, and she will not be kind." He turned and looked to Maldine. "Lucky you. She's going to take your life last. Enjoy the show." The gold coins began to rust and crumble in their hands, and as it did so, anyone still in a trance was freed to face their doom. The congregation began to scream and cry out to Maldine as the veiled one rose up from the floor. She had the visage of a reaper, but was lighter. Her face never shone as it was shrouded in darkness. As she rose up from the floor, she also increased in size, nearly touching the ceiling. Smoke swirled around the room and formed into iron bars over the windows and doors. As the people tried to flee, every exit was blocked. Caliche spoke in a booming voice. "You have all been condemned. You lived freely, with 4 years to make peace with your sins, but instead lived your lives of lust and pleasures. You would worship a fae rather than your true gods. You have been sentenced." A large dog formed at the doorway. He was a beastly, demonic-looking thing, and anyone who got close enough was soon made into a quick snack for him. Caliche spread her arms out wide and looked down at the people. Many knelt down to pray for forgiveness. She looked to them all, and from the darkness of her hood she spoke again. I shall grant you all the mercy of a quick death, for you all are merely human and cannot be held fully accountable for your foolishness. The crowd's screams rose as she grew, and boils began to grow on their skin. Rashes and bursting pustules rose up. They began to cough and vomit uncontrollably. Maldine threw up as she began to smell the vomit, piss, and shit from the crowd as they lost control of their bowels. The men, women, and children all fell victim to the disease that was rapidly taking them. Marcus chuckled and picked up a fallen coin off the floor as he walked through the crowd. He flipped it in the air and turned to look at Maldine. I think I recall your hymn, my dear. May his blood be a message to the horde. Did I get that right? Because I'm pretty sure they got the message. Marcus looked to the beastly dog that guarded the gates and gave it a big scratch under the chin before walking past and through the gate. Maldine could see Marcus walking away toward the stables from a window. Soon the wailing stopped, and before Maldine, the entire congregation was laid low in their own filth. She looked up and saw Caliche looming over her. Maldine began to cry, to beg for a showing of mercy. Caliche brought down a large pointer finger and touched the rope, causing it to crumble away. Caliche lifted Maldine into the air and ripped the back portion of her dress to reveal a beautiful set of clear wings. Your glimmer will not work on one such as me. Caliche spoke softly to give Maldine a sense of ease, and then swiftly ripped the wings out of the madam's back and dropped her to the stage. You will not die on this day. You have caused this, and you shall clean it up. You shall have no rest until your establishment of sin is as pristine as a palace. My pet shall make sure you don't avoid your responsibilities. The dog growled at the Fae and sat guard. Maldine rose up, ignoring the blood running down her back, and looked back to Caliche. And once I have done my task? Caliche began to fade away. Then, you wretched Fae, you shall die. Marcus exhaled smoke from his cigarette as he mounted his horse. He looked to the small girl whom he had paid earlier to watch the horse. I assume your father was in the saloon today. The girl looked at him and shrugged. I'm sure he will be back soon, she said as sweetly as any child could speak. Marcus looked away and his horse gave a snort. Okay. Marcus looked down at the girl and smiled kindly. He won't be, and I am sorry for that. But I have a feeling you will have a long and proper life, little lady. He tipped his hat and began to ride off. Marcus and his horse both faded into the air as they rode out of town. The girl watched in astonishment. As she turned, she was met by a beautiful red-headed woman with long locks and a kind smile. Oh, hello, ma'am. When did you get here? Hello, young one. I have been here forever, making sure you are okay. My name is Bridget. What is your name? The girl smiled and gave a curtsy. Mary? Bridget knelt down and produced a flower for the girl's hair. Come with me, Mary. I have many wonders to show you. As Mary and Bridget left the stables, the animals followed them. Bridget began to lead them the opposite way of the saloon. As they entered a beautiful field, Mary's eyes grew wide to see all the animals and greenery that was in front of her. Bridget smiled down at her. I could really use help caring for my animals. Do you think you can help me, Mary? Mary nodded and knelt down in the grass as a small lamb came to her. Bridget looked behind them, and with a wave of her hand, Dry Man's Gulch was no longer visible in any direction. Mary had been kind in her short life, and the gods were happy to return the favor.